Again, remember, for the folks pushing this stuff, they don't actually believe in such a concept as the public. So that is where, we have a big problem.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So, school choice, we talked about this during the legislative update. I wanted to dive into this a little bit more. There are multiple visions. Of course, there's just several different visions of school choice, school privatization, I think it's more accurate, that are trying to be implemented across the country or have been implemented across the country. But here in Alabama, we've got basically two, right? We've got two. We've got the kind of the most extreme version being put forward by State Representative Ernie Yarborough, and then a more moderate version being put forward by the governor, Ledbetter, and Arthur Orr. Ledbetter is the State House Speaker.
That's correct.
Yeah, and Arthur Orr is, what is he, the Education Committee Chair?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
Education Budget Committee Chair.
Education Budget Committee Chair. Yeah. So these are the pretty powerful kind of people in Alabama politics, especially on the education issue. And so if they're pushing this more moderate one, that would be the more likely one to go through. But there could be some complications about, well, are people going to get so spun up on Yarborough's plan that the Republicans would vote down the more moderate version of it, and so we'll have to kind of tell. But Adam, can you give me the more details about the two plans and what their similarities are and what the differences are?
Sure. Yeah. So let's start with the Choose Act, which is the one you mentioned that's pushed by leadership, and what it would do is basically create tax credits. So for the first 2 years, it would offer a tax credit of up to $7,000 for households making up to 300% of the poverty level, or about $75,000 a year for a family of three. And this tax credit could be used towards private school tuition. The income cap would be lifted in the third year of the program, right? So it's a gradually phased in. Not every family is going to be immediately eligible for it. My understanding is also that special education students will also be eligible in this first early phase in, and so the governor's calling for about $100 million to fund this off the first year, and naturally it's going to raise. The other bill being pushed by Yarborough is actually a little bit more expansive. It's got less of a phase-in, it's got less of a cap, and so it would be more expensive, and it's just more broad in like how it can be used. So the $7,000 tax credit you get is for the private school tuition under the Choose Act. It's a smaller amount, I believe, a $2,000 amount for homeschooling. Whereas my understanding with the more extreme bill is it's just like, here's the flat amount, whether you're homeschooling, whether you're private school, it's a lot more flexible in terms of what it can be spent on. So it's definitely more extreme in terms of its cost to the budget, in terms of its overall, privatization aspects. Something that's worth noting is that the governor also mentioned, like in her State of the State address earlier this past week, that she wants to have the highest teacher salaries in the South, and wanted to increase the starting salaries for teachers. And so you can kind of see what's happening here is they're dangling higher teacher salaries in exchange for more school choice, more school privatization. Alabama already ranks in the top 20 in terms of school choice, like by the people who, create these lists, right? And we're not in the top 20 when it comes to teacher salaries, let me tell you that much. Our per pupil funding, for sure, right? So because the state of Alabama already has charter schools that are legalized, the state of Alabama already has the Alabama Accountability Act, which is a voucher-like program. It's private school scholarships It's also a tax write-off for wealthy donors who want to give to these programs. And so that has already cost the Education Trust Fund budget hundreds of millions of dollars over the past decade, and already, funneled public dollars into private pockets. And that's ultimately what this is all about. It's going to be interesting to see if the far right will be satisfied by Governor Ivey's bill. It does touch on state accredited private schools, as my understanding. So like I said, it's a little bit more restrictive in what the money can be spent on and where it can be directed, and more limited in its rollout. And so will that be enough to satisfy the school choice extremist? And they're out there. They have been pushing for a very long time to destroy public education. Ultimately, you have kind of a coalition. You have the big money interests who stand to profit. And so you have capitalist interests who see public education as a potential pool of money to tap into, right? And then you have the reactionary segregationist ideology that is motivating so many of these forces behind this. Pushing for religious fundamentalist instruction, right? They want to be able to indoctrinate children, and you pay for it as a taxpayer. That's what they're asking for, which is ironic, right? Because a whole big piece of the Alabama Republican Party's platform and its current shenanigans is this idea that there are, quote unquote, woke teachers and grooming and indoctrinating students. And there are woke librarians who are, harming your children with library books. And so they've got this narrative out there that this is happening. And make no mistake, that is part of the puzzle, right? That is part of weakening the reputation of public education. That is part of driving demands for alternatives to public education, right? So they sabotage the public schools with these narratives, with the underfunding, with all the different ways in which public schools are held back from their potential. And this creates this demand among what is still a very small minority of parents. Make no mistake about that. Most families are perfectly happy with their public school. Are there things that they would want to see improved? Sure. But most families are not out here looking for this. And that's even where it's available, because in some of the Democrats in the legislature have made this point. Hey, there's a lot of counties that don't even have alternative schools besides the public schools. There's plenty of places where there is nowhere else to go. So, is this even going to provide a choice? Now, the other concern, and we talked with Dr. Josh Cowan, what was it, 2 weeks ago, or a week or two ago, and I really recommend you check that out if you haven't seen that interview, because he absolutely, did a great job explaining the scam behind these voucher programs. But kind of to that point, I'm concerned that there could be an influx of new private schools. Bubba's Bible School opens up down at the strip mall to try to take advantage of these, tax subsidies, basically, which, that is a real concern, I think. We know that this is not about improving academic outcomes for children. That's not part of it. Right. And increasingly, the proponents don't even try to pretend that's part of it. What I'm noticing a lot more and more, it's about reactionary ideology. It's about it's the fundamentalism around free market, and this should be a free market institution just like anything else, and you should be able to choose and purchase and shop on the marketplace for your child's education just like you do their tennis shoes. So there's that ideology aspect behind it, but also this phenomena referenced earlier about quote unquote woke socialist agenda. That's literally in the Alabama Republican Party's platform this year, is that there is a woke socialist agenda that is being pushed through our public schools, through our public libraries, and that they have to combat that. Of course, it's not even in touch with reality. Right. they couldn't explain what they mean by that if you asked them. These people have never read Karl Marx, actually. They don't know what it is they're even talking about.
Right.
It's just euphemisms, right? And you can fill in the blanks in your own mind. Whatever group of people you don't like, whatever group you have some bigotry against, you know, you can associate it with it.
Now, Adam, you know, as we're going down, I want to back up just a little bit and get maybe just a bit more fidelity on the Choose Act, and then I want to go into how the AEA is responding to this or might respond to this. So on some more details on the Choose Act, just for a reference, how you said it would earmark basically $100 million. How much is the education budget in the last year or for this year? What is it slated to be? Isn't it like $8 billion or something, somewhere around $8 billion?
Yeah, so it is definitely in that neighborhood. Let's see if I can find it real quick.
And then the more radical version of school choice, Yarbrough's bill, that is projected, or at least a previous version of unlimited universal school choice was estimated to cost, what, $550 million?
Yes, it was several $100 million more than, what we're talking about with this Choose Act. But again, this is the initial roll-in, right? It only grows more expensive over time.
That was my next question. Is you said that it grows more expensive over time. Is the increase in the cap of $100 million, is that increase an automatic ramp up built into the act where, if you do nothing, the default in the Choose Act is that in year 2 it goes to, just a number, let's say 150 million, and then the year after that it goes to 200? Or is it that the Choose Act is being introduced as an introduction with the implication that we're going to come back down the road, and if this is working, we're going to do another bill?
No, my understanding is it is phased up as it's phased in, right? And so those increases will be built into it. 100 million is where it starts, but will, by the definition of the bill, increase. And
so will it increase to the ultimately the more radical universal 7,000 anybody for anything, no state accreditation?
That's hard to say. Honestly, that is hard to say at this time. I think it's a little early right now. It's going to take some real analysis to figure out how much would this actually cost, and it gets kind of wonky, especially with them classifying this as a tax credit, right? And I just want to say on that note, we could just do a child tax credit for every family in Alabama, similar to the pandemic era federal tax credit. A lot of states have done that kind of thing, and it's very successful. Yeah. It is very successful. It turns out if you just give families a little extra cash, they will spend it to help themselves, and it grows the economy, and they're a little bit less poor and a little bit less desperate. And, that would give families a resource. And if they decided to spend it on private schools, okay, whatever floats your boat, right? But that seems to be, to me, a much more common sense proposal. But that wouldn't achieve the objective of weakening public education. Because, again, remember that for the folks pushing this stuff, they don't actually believe in such a concept as the public. So that is where, we have a big problem.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And so the people that are basically tasked with defending public education is the AEA. Ultimately, that's who it's going to fall to. You said that you got an op-ed recently from their journal about this, about school choice, the issue. What is your read on the tack that they're going to take this year? This legislative session?
Yeah. So so the Alabama Education Association is the biggest education group, right? They represent the majority of the employees in the state. of course, so they're not the only group, right? The school superintendents have their own organization. The administrators do as well. The school board members do as well. And those can be quite powerful in their lobbying presence. But yeah, the Alabama Education Association, ultimately, it's going to be whether or not they can lead the fight in defeating this. And as we've talked a little bit about on the show before, their approach in the last several years has been to be friendly to the Republican supermajority. And by friendly, I mean basically play possum during the legislative session, not put up too much of a public, fight, and during campaign cycles give millions of dollars to Republican candidates. They gave some money to Democrats as well, but basically their approach was whoever was most likely to win is who they gave money to. I mean, it's a pretty simple buy your influence kind of scheme. And so arguably they've seen some success with that, right? Because from 2010 to like 2015, 16, they got their ass kicked tremendously on every front. That's when the charter schools were legalized. That's when the Accountability Act was passed. That's when tenure was watered down. It's when a second tier of retirement pensions were created. It's when Alabama had some of the steepest cuts to K-12 education after the recession of any state in the country, and on and on and on, right? So for like 5-6 years, they got their ass totally handed to them. So they took a different approach, which was, if we can't beat them, we'll join them. And so we'll play nice with them. We'll give them lots of cash come campaign season. We will hopefully buy enough favor that they'll kind of leave us alone every year. And we can keep growing the budget and growing teacher salaries. And so they've had some success over the last few years in doing that, arguably. The budgets have grown. Salaries have grown. There hasn't been a huge expansion of school choice in the last few years. But circling in the background, these past few years has been these pushes for school choice alongside the various reactionary ideological attacks about wokeness and socialism and all this other garbage. And they've been real quiet. They did put out some strong language in their new journal that I got in the mailbox yesterday. And it was pretty strong on the school choice scam. But the interesting thing to watch is, where does that lead, right? It's one thing to put a, strong op-ed in your own journal, but are you activating members to put that message out? Are your members going to be expected to call legislators and email and show up in Montgomery? Are you going to run a media blitz, either paid or earned? Are you going to call out some of these politicians that you've given money to? And that's going to be interesting to watch. Is take a look at all the politicians who've gotten a vote contributions and where do they line up on school choice? Because it's going to kind of have, be egg on your face if you gave money to people who didn't stab you in the back, right?
Right.
So that'll be interesting to watch. Frankly, my assessment of Alabama's educators is that they are just disorganized. The AEA is in many ways a company union, right? Your boss literally can join. Your principal, your superintendent, your HR director, they can join the association. And believe me, a lot of times they do. And a lot of times that's who is catered to. And so that's a dynamic that is problematic, I guess you could say,
Right.
when the people who are supposed to represent you are also the people punishing you. So that's an interesting dynamic for them to deal with. But Alabama educators are, in my experience and in my assessment, very disengaged from all this. And that's part of the issue is educators alongside parents, students, and our allies have to organize to defend public education and to improve public education. And you have to do both, right? We have to defend it from getting worse. We have to defend our budget from all these ways to siphon money out through tax credits and through voucher schemes and all this other stuff. But we also have to be putting forward a proactive vision of what better public schools could look like, right? So that people aren't as interested in school choice alternatives.
Right.
And we do need to make our public schools better in Alabama, right? Again, check the metrics. It's clear that we need to do that. And part of that is because it's a reflection of the communities in which they serve. And when Alabama is, again, last at most everything, it's going to trickle into the schools. But these are all issues that need to be addressed. And so we'll see what happens with the big school choice push. If it passes, will it be over AEA's opposition, or will they kind of stay quiet during this battle? Will the higher teacher salaries be enough to kind of buy their silence? I think is going to be one of the questions. And so, we'll see. My personal belief is that educators in Alabama are going to have to save themselves. It's not going to come from, the school board members and the superintendents. It's not going to come from the bureaucrats at AEA in Montgomery. I think that's obvious if you look at the evidence. Look at your working conditions. Look at what your students are experiencing every day. And I couldn't help but notice in that AEA journal, there were some strong words about vouchers from the executive director. But the very first page, the very first article, talked about starting another successful legislative session for students and educators of Alabama. Educators of Alabama, how successful do you feel these sessions have been for you? And will a higher salary be enough for you?
Right.
Will that address the lack of class size limits? Will that address the broken playgrounds and the moldy ceilings? Will it address the planning time that you're not getting, that's being violated repeatedly without consequence? Will it address the terrible working conditions so many of our educators are experiencing in so many schools across the state, the high turnover? I'm sorry, but I don't think salary alone can cut it. And I've always believed that, and I've believed that since, I called out Superintendent Casey Rudinsky in the Huntsville Times years and years ago, and he wanted to do that same thing and make it a salary issue.
Right.
But it's not just about salary, right? There's a lot more to it. And I've talked with probably hundreds, if not well over 1,000 educators in my life. And they all wanted to be paid better, but they all wanted to be treated better. They all wanted the tools and resources and capacity to be effective at their job. They wanted justice for their students. And I don't see anyone really pushing for that, right? And so there's a lot more that we could be doing. And my advice, my suggestion, my open call to educators is to learn from what folks have done in other states. And I would encourage the most forward-thinking educators in this state to organize a caucus amongst themselves that can operate both inside and outside of these institutions, and develop this positive vision of what public schools in Alabama could really look like, but will only be achieved if there's a real movement behind it. And so educators have to come together. I would encourage educators to learn from the Chicago Teachers Union and the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, or from the movement of rank and file educators in New York, or from the Red State Revolts, right? From Arizona to West Virginia to Kentucky. It's not a secret. It can work. It can work. But educators have to kind of seize the day. And I know that you're tired, and I know that you're busy, and I know you're demoralized. And so are auto workers, and so are Starbucks baristas, and so are all of us, right? We're all tired. We're all busy. We're all demoralized. But that's my belief, that schools in Alabama are always going to be under attack. They're never going to get better until the educators band together with the parents and the students and the community allies and really change the dynamics. Why don't you have collective bargaining in this state, and why isn't anyone asking? Why don't you even have paid parental leave in this state? A profession that's 80% female, and you don't even have maternal leave.
Right.
In the year 2024. It's ridiculous. So
one more thing that I think we should just say on the AEA strategy to combat this is they have recently brought on a Republican political consultant to help them message their anti-school choice campaign. So,
well, that's interesting. I mean, and they're doing a delicate dance of trying to appease conservative rural whites while disproportionately relying upon their black membership. You go to AEA events, and it's going to be heavily African American. In terms of who's actually participating, who's actually serving in local officer roles, who's actually serving as building reps, who's going to the delegate assembly. It's disproportionately black folks who are joining and participating. But at the same time, politically, they are trying to cater to a much more conservative rural white base that they have been really, you know, struggling to recruit and retain in their membership. You know, while also, I guess, trying to make peace with the political realities in Alabama. And I get it. But, you know, that's the approach they've taken. And I don't think that it's sustainable in the long term. You go to bed with snakes, eventually you're going to get bit.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.